anthology on the bad, the short-lived, and the forgotten shows and events in television history. This is It Was a Thing on TV.
C would write poetry, believe it or not. Therefore, our continuing champions are the Hunts with 300 with how many points, I don't know.
Episode 511, submission number 751, A Man Called Sloane. A Man Called Sloane aired on NBC from September 22nd of 1979 to December 22nd of 1979 for a total of 12 episodes, 3/4 of a crock block. Here we go again. We're going to talk about an NBC show from 1979. We talked about plenty of NBC shows from 1979. We basically went through the list of it at the end of the last episode. We talked about Turnabout. We talked about Supertrain. We talked about Hello, Larry. We talked about Mrs. Columbo, also known as Kate Loves a Mystery. We're going to do another show. This time, we're going to talk about A Man Called Sloane. We're going to veer into the spy territory. We're going to sort of get into James Bondish type of stuff, kind of, sort of, maybe dollar store James Bond, because James Bond was big. I mean, James Bond has been big since the 60s, but I think he was really big in the 70s and even into the early 80s, maybe until we got to Timothy Dalton. But 79, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, that would have been Moonraker?
Yep.
So right in the middle of the Roger Moore era. So A Man Called Sloane is basically like James Bond, that sort of masculine machismo spy with a little bit of some other TV series mixed in, a little bit of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., a little bit of Mission Impossible. So it's a nice like amalgamation of the spy genre. The main character, this man called Sloane, his real name is Thomas Remington Sloane III. Does that not sound like a debonair spy name? Thomas Remington Sloane III.
Sounds classy.
Well, I hear Remington, and the first thing I think of, obviously, is Remington Steele. So now I'm thinking to myself, was Remington Steele maybe named after Thomas Remington Sloane III? I know one of you's on the case. I'm not even going to touch it. But yes, the main character, the title character, is Thomas R. Sloane III, who's a spy, who's actually a freelance spy, not just a regular spy that's, let's say, contracted out by a certain agency. He does basically freelance operations. And the organization he usually does assignments for is UNIT. Just a secret American intelligence operation.
Hold on. Not the organization from Doctor Who.
Correct. And UNIT, their headquarters, believe it or not, well, it was a secret entrance because it's a secret organization. Their headquarters were actually located through a toy store. And I'm just getting ideas about this toy store in later episodes, if this was actually successful. Going through the toy store, look, Mom, there's a Man Called Sloane doll. Can I get it? I think that would be the perfect, like, cross promotion. They go through the toy store. Oh, look, it's the action figures. Hey, there's a Thomas R. Sloane III doll. And you can get that doll at Toys R Us or Children's Palace or wherever fine toys are sold. I think that's brilliant marketing if the series was that successful. Just my opinion. Just like any good spy show, you have to have an enemy organization. You look at Get Smart, again, another spy show, albeit comedic. You had Control as the organization that Maxwell Smart worked for, and their opponent, their arch enemy, was Chaos. Well, we have Unit here, and their enemy is Cartel, Kartel. I don't have any sort of definition as to what Cartel is, if it means something specific, but Cartel is the nemesis of Unit. And Sloane doesn't work alone. I'm getting sort of James Bond vibes here, because James Bond doesn't work alone. Sloane has an assistant, and his name is Torque. And he's like the right-hand man. He's the heavy. I think that's a term Chico would use. He's the heavy in this show. And he does look kind of heavy. But also, Torque, it doesn't say if he's human or partially human or non-human, but he has a hand that has interchangeable parts. So now I'm sort of getting an Inspector Gadget vibe. He can turn his hand into a drill or a saw blade or whatever you need for the situation. So I think very much like Inspector Gadget in that regard. And they were also assisted by Effie, a computer. So now that we know the basics about A Man Called Sloane, how about we look into who's on A Man Called Sloane? And we'll start off with Thomas Remington Sloane III, played by Robert Conrad, who you would know from The Wild Wild West, but also, again, if you're of a certain age, basically late 70s, so right around this time, he was known for pitching Ever-Ready batteries. And I've seen Johnny Carson mimic this in his little spoofs, his skits, where you try to knock off the battery off my shoulder, and somebody on the side of the stage throws pies at him, and just a usual Carson parody spoof of pop culture. The person who runs Unit, he's given the title the Director. There's no formal name. He's just called the Director. And the Director is played by Dan O'Herlihy. Dan O'Herlihy, he was in both RoboCop and RoboCop 2 as the old man.
He was the guy in the boardroom at the end who looks at RoboCop and says, and this is after RoboCop shoots whatever his name is out the window. He looks at RoboCop and says, "Nice suit, son. What's your name?"
Dan O'Herlihy also had a role in one of our favorite shows. I'm sorry, I should say Greg's favorite show, or one of his favorites, Twin Peaks. He was Andrew Packard.
He was in the end of the second season. He gets blown up in the final episode of season 2 in a bank vault, and it's the hilarious twist I've ever seen. It is so great. But Dan O'Herlihy was also the villain in one of my favorite movies, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. He was the head of Silver Shamrock Novelties.
So definitely a known actor there. Torque, the heavy, again using a Chico term, who had the interchangeable hand, was played by Jitu Kumbuka. Not really known for any one thing outside of this. He did a lot of stuff, though. And just going through his IMDb, looks like the only thing that he was on, which involved more than 2 episodes, was Young Daniel Boone in 1977 and 78. He played Hawk. So he was essentially that guy from that thing. I mentioned we had a computer in the series named Effie. The voice of Effie was provided by Michelle Carey. And actually, going back to Robert Conrad talking about the Wild Wild West, she was on 3 episodes of the Wild Wild West in 1967 through 1969. And just like G2 Kumbuka, Michelle Carey was not on many episodes of any given series outside of A Man Called Sloane. She was on 3 episodes of the Wild Wild West in the late 60s. But besides that, she was on 3 episodes of a series called Wendy and Me back in 1965. So those are the particulars that are on most episodes. Let's take a look at the series. There's 12 episodes, so this should be a pretty quick job going through these. Starting off with episode 1, titled Night of the Wizard. Sloane must stop a wave of terrorism being committed by 5 female androids who are powered by plutonium. Yeah, that sounds like something from the 70s. Robots powered by plutonium. That just sort of screams 70s to me. And we do have a name in this episode, not one of the robots, but playing Manfred Baranoff is Roddy McDowell. Planet of the Apes. Episode 2 is titled The Seduction Squad. Sloane and Torque investigate why people associated with U.S. defense projects are sabotaging various facilities. It turns out they're being programmed by Denton, who is using beautiful women to program them. Agents know Denton has a major plot and are running out of time to find out what it is. So again, very, let's say, stereotypically spy movie-ish. But the thing is, you think about Bond, and outside of Bond and his tools and contraptions and the Aston Martin he drives, I think the big thing that comes to mind with James Bond is all the Bond girls. And I think we're seeing that early on between the first episode with the female androids, and now we've got someone who's using beautiful women to sabotage these facilities. We got a few names in this episode. First is Lee Purcell. No character name given. Lee Purcell has actually been around quite some time, and the reason I picked her out first and foremost is, and I think this is just earlier this week I saw this, she was on an episode of Barnaby Jones, which, just like A Man Called Sloane, is
a Quinn Martin production.
But taking a look at her IMDb, since we're talking about Quinn Martin Productions, not only was she in A Man Called Sloane, not only was she in Barnaby Jones, but she was also on an episode of Canon, actually 3 episodes of Canon, and she was on an episode of The Streets of San Francisco. So maybe she's that actress from that Quinn Martin production. Well, not all of them, but she was on 4 of them. But also in this episode, as Edward Denton, we have Robert Culp. I Spy. He worked with Mr. Black.
Greatest American Hero.
That's better because that doesn't involve Mr. Black.
No, that involves William Catt and Connie Selica.
Oh, that was in unison. That was a good job, guys.
The theme song was so great, George Costanza needed his answering machine message.
One more person I want to name, and I'm going to guess this is one of those female sabotage artists. Her name in the episode is Angelica Braden. The actress playing her is Sybil Danning. That name rings a bell for some reason. I don't see anything immediately saying something she was known for, but Sybil Danning definitely is a name from the 80s.
I believe she was on the cover of the August 83 issue of Playboy, where she was dubbed the Queen of the Action Flicks.
Oh, that's where I remember her from. No, I wasn't reading it. I would have been like 8 at the time, and my dad would have kicked my ass if I did. Hey, Dad. Oh, actually, I think I see where we know her from now. It was on a week of Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour.
Nice save there.
I didn't save anything. That was IMDb that saved us. Oh, and actually, I think this is the week before Bill Cullen was on. Early January of 1984. January 9th through the 13th of 84. Boy, that was a pretty average week looking at the celebrities here. Anson Williams, Leonard Fry. Well, Leonard Fry's not average, but Leonard Fry, Pat McCormick, Phil Proctor. Yeah, I'm going to say that's where I remember her from because I certainly don't remember her from that Playboy wink, wink, wink. Episode 3 is titled Tuned for Destruction. Sloane must prevent a rogue general from launching an attack on a third world nation. In this episode, we have 2 names. The first name, this has to be like a Bond girl name. I'm just saying that from what I saw. Playing Corporal Comfort. That's what I go to when I want to get a new mattress. I go to Corporal Comfort. Played by Denise Dewberry. She played Nurse Samantha Green on Black Sheep Squadron, a.k.a. Baba Black Sheep. Corporal Comfort. Hey, I got a before and after. Corporal Comfort Cat. You don't like Corporal Comfort Cat?
It was okay.
And actually, another place I recognize Denise Dewberry's name. She was on a week of Match Game 78. And I think she was right around the time that the Star Wheel and the new set came to being. Actually, I think of all things, she may have been in that brief little, what was it, 2-week, 4-week period where you had the Star Wheel on the old set before it got the makeover. So she was probably there right about the end of Richard Dawson's tenure. But the second name, not a well-known name, it hasn't done anything really big outside of 23 episodes of Operation Petticoat. But when you hear the name, you're going to know why I picked out this person playing a radio officer, not even a real character, just a radio officer, Peter Schuck. Yes, the brother of It Was a Thing on TV Hall of Famer, John Schuck.
Did he think those Starfleet regulations were outrageous too?
He had to because he's defending his brother, yes.
Couple more names in this episode. Speaking of Star Trek, playing Soom Nook, Rosalind Chow, Keiko O'Brien from TNG and Deep Space Nine.
But we mentioned her in Aftermath.
Yeah, she was Klinger's wife.
And then playing Alice Baker is Sandra Kearns, aka Mrs. Powell from Charles in Charge.
Episode 4 is titled Masquerade of Terror. A master of disguise who works for Cartel, whom Thomas placed in prison, escapes. He wants him to steal a weapon, but first wants them to bring his girlfriend to him. Thomas, knowing this, gets to her first. When the guy finds out, he kills the cartel man and sets out to get her and Thomas. One name in this episode, don't even have a character name. This may be the girlfriend, though I sort of doubt it because she has no character name. We have T.U. Leak in this episode, who we've talked about previously because she was one of the hostesses on That's My Line. And she also did at least a week of To Tell the Truth in 1980. Episode 5 is titled Demon's Triangle. Sloane goes after a modern-day pirate who forced down a plane which was transporting defense secrets. Episode 6 is titled The Venus Microbe. Some scientists are working on a microbe that was found on the Venus probe when it came back from there. Now it can destroy all life when released. One of the scientists steals the container, but in doing so, he releases some of it. So the lab is sealed and all the scientists inside only have a few days before they have to blow up the lab. Thomas deduces that Cartel is the one behind the theft. And also they deduce that they wouldn't take something they couldn't control, so there must be an antidote. But the scientists who stole the microbe stole the formula for the antidote too. But when they decide to test the antidote on the scientist himself, it doesn't work. It seems that part of the formula is missing, so they have to find it. Thomas also learns that a woman was following the scientist. He finds her and learns she is a PI who was following him because his wife was wondering where he is. She tells Thomas that the scientist went to a gambling place which is owned by a man who works for Cartel. Thomas goes there and meets the man who knows why Thomas is there, so he tries to get rid of him. Playing Jonathan Cambro, who I'm guessing is one of the scientists involved with this. We talked about this gentleman not too long ago, Monty Markham. He played Perry Mason in the early 70s remake of Perry Mason.
Playing Melissa Nelson is Morgan Fairchild, John Lovitz's wife, except not really.
Hey, we just mentioned Morgan Fairchild in the last couple of weeks because I have to play it anytime we mention her. She was on the last week of Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour, and Gene Rayburn had 2 words to say about her.
You're gorgeous.
Episode 7 is titled Collision Course. An investigation into a murder which occurred at an observatory leads Sloane to plot to crash a comet into the Earth. We have a number of names in episode 7, and the first one is a character named Crane, and we just talked about this person last week. I believe we were talking about him when Greg was talking about that Meet the Doodles or the Deedles movie or whatever it was.
Meet the Deedles.
Meet the Deedles, yeah. And I think this was Greg's amazing discovery. Played the father in Meet the Deedles. Eric Braeden. Eric Braeden was in A Man Called Sloane and Meet the Deedles. I'm sure 2 highlights of his resume. Like I said, top of the resume. Who cares about Young and the Restless? Also in this episode playing Elsa is Pat Klaus, no relation. She was cruise director Judy McCoy in later years of The Love Boat. That'll take us to episode 8, and episode 8 is titled Samurai. The president of a country who is an ally of the U.S. comes to the country for a visit. He's been receiving threats from someone who wants him to resign so that they can put their puppet in his place. Thomas is assigned to him and knows that it's Cartel who is threatening him. Later, the man's daughter has been kidnapped, and Thomas recognizes the man who took her. It's someone who has a grudge against Thomas. Thomas knows that in addition to doing Cartel's bidding, he plans to use her to get Thomas to come to him so they can have a battle to the death. We got names in this episode. First and foremost, playing Tanaka, who I'm guessing is one of the allies, maybe the president of the country that's visiting the United States. This guy, if he's not in the hall, he's got to be on the verge. Mako. We've talked about Mako many times. Playing Carrie in this episode, and there's an obvious reason why I mentioned her, Nancy Conrad, Robert Conrad's daughter. In addition to being Robert Conrad's daughter, she was on 14 episodes of Baba Black Sheep. There's a lot of people on this series who were on Baba Black Sheep. I'm noticing that for some reason. This is at least, I think, the 3rd person I've seen in these first handful of episodes who was on Baba Black Sheep or Black Sheep Squadron. Another name playing Prentice is Earl Bowen. I think he's in the Hall of Fame. We've talked about him enough. He's sort of like that guy from That Thing, but the place I remember him, he was, I think in the first season of Soap, he was the judge. Because if you remember in Soap, the first season, I think the Tates were getting a divorce. I think this is before all the murdering and whatnot. I think Chester Tate wanted to get a divorce from Jessica. Or maybe she ended up possibly hospitalized. It's been a long time since I've seen season 1. But I remember Earl Bowen as the judge in that story arc. Episode 9 is titled Sweethearts of Disaster. Thomas is sent to observe the testing of a new laser. He sees another agent doing the same thing. Later, some women steal the laser. Again, more women. I get it's the 70s. I get it's trying to be a spy series, but again, women doing stuff. Hey, more women. Thomas tries to stop them but fails. But he manages to damage the gem needed. In order to draw the ones who stole it out, Torque poses as an African who is selling a similar one. And sure enough, someone comes to buy it, but so does the agent Thomas saw at the testing. He lets the one who has the laser get it. But when he refuses the buyer's check, they steal it. Thomas follows them, hoping to recover the laser. Episode 10 is titled Ladybug. A cartel agent has devised a plan to destroy the American wheat crop with killer locusts. No character name, but a big person in this episode. Martin Cove. Need I say more?
6 words. Strike first. Strike fast. No mercy.
Sweep the leg.
I was just hoping you were going to say Cobra Kai. That's all you really need to say. Cobra Kai, Karate Kid. We all know who Martin Cove is. Oh, and Greg, since I mentioned Martin Cove, since I have this in my collection, he was in, I believe, Americana Series 2.
Yes.
The 2009 series. Because one card that I pulled from it back in the day is a dual autograph of Martin Cove and Ralph Macchio.
Oh, that's nice.
It's a really cool card, especially since Cobra Kai has come along. It's gotten that much more popular, and obviously with popularity comes value. So yeah, that's in my safe. That's one of those cards I'm going to hold on to for a while because Martin Cove has gotten, I don't want to say sexy, but he's gotten popular with Cobra Kai. 2 more episodes to go. Episode 11 is titled Architect of Evil. Pendergrast, a man who works for cartel, is under surveillance. The agent keeping an eye on him overhears him talking about his great plan, and now that he has the blue crystal, he can go forward. But a burglar breaks into Pendergast's estate, steals his crystal thinking it's a gem. The agent is then instructed to get the cat burglar, but Pendergast's men shoot the agent. Thomas is told of what happened, and he tries to find the cat burglar, and does, but he doesn't have the crystal. Thomas then poses as the burglar and lets Pendergast grab him. They learn that the cat burglar gave the crystal to a girl who, upon seeing something odd about it, gives it to a scientist. Pendergast makes Thomas steal it. Thomas gets it, and Pendergast gets away. So Thomas has to find out what Pendergast is planning and stop him. Playing Pendergast, full name Worthington Pendergast, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this person in the past, Michael Pataki.
Yeah, he was in Rocky IV as Drago's handler.
Where we talked about him is he played a pool player in an episode of Automan. So that goes way back. I know we just revisited that not too long ago, but he was in Automan. That'll take us to the final episode titled The Shangri-La Syndrome. Sloane must recover the formula for a hormone which can be used in cloning and to induce rapid aging, which has fallen into cartel's hands. We got a doctor in this episode, and it's a known doctor. We've talked about this person quite a bit. Daphne Maxwell Reid. Well, actually, she went as Daphne Maxwell in this episode. This is before she married Tim Reed, apparently. But yeah, Daphne Maxwell Reid from Frank's Place, among other things. But we've talked about her in the CBS Playhouse summer series when they showed those pilots. But also, obviously, if she was on Frank's Place, she worked with Shadi LaRue, which, as Greg has proven, when you watch the episodes on Game TV with the captioning on, they actually have the captioning saying his character's name is Shorty LaRue, not Shadi LaRue.
Well, let's remember, it is John Barber's son's favorite show, along with John Tesh's.
One other name I want to mention, playing Masters. Don't know exactly what he does here, but Masters is played by Cormac O'Hurley, Dan O'Hurley's son. So we had Robert Conrad's daughter earlier, and now we have Dan O'Hurley's son in this final episode. So that's 12 episodes, and that is the series. So the big question is, what happened? To start off with, believe it or not, the ratings were not bad. I saw a couple of articles saying that this may be the hit that helps NBC get out of that funk that we've talked about so often in 1979. That was early on. I think that was about 3 weeks into the series. But I pulled up the numbers for the ratings throughout later in the series. It was almost consistently in the bottom 10%. I saw ratings where there were like 58 shows and it was 54th. And really, the shows that it did worse than, they weren't even regularly shown shows. They were specials. Thanksgiving specials, holiday specials, Halloween specials. The one show that always lost, it seemed, to A Man Called Sloane was Eyeshine, which I do believe is another NBC series from that time era. So the ratings definitely were not there. What if we take a look at the schedule? A Man Called Sloane aired Saturdays at 10 p.m. On CBS at this point, would have been a weekly movie, a Saturday night movie. But on ABC, it generally went up against Fantasy Island at 10 o'clock. But I'm even noticing in some weeks it went up against Heart to Heart. And this would have been Heart to Heart's first season, and Fantasy Island would have been a known entity at that point. So maybe you're just not beating whatever movie CBS is showing. Plus, again, Fantasy Island, it aired for years in that 10 p.m. Saturday slot. So it had a good handle on it.
You said ratings for A Man Called Sloane weren't bad, right?
To start.
Through my research, I found out that A Man Called Sloane was actually one of the most expensive TV shows produced in the 79-80 season. So, not getting the return on investment NBC was.
I didn't know NBC had money left over after Supertrain. I say that jokingly because obviously they do have money, but still, after Supertrain was probably the biggest bust, definitely of 1979, but probably one of the biggest busts in television history at that point, NBC then goes out and commissions this show, which had a huge budget. That doesn't make much sense to me. I get NBC was very desperate at that time for ratings, but you just invested millions and millions of dollars in Supertrain, which was a colossal flop. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, also consider that NBC Supertrain was an in-house production. This, not so much. It was produced by Quinn Martin in association with Woodruff Productions.
Well, no, let's keep it real here. This was not
A Quinn Martin production.
It was
A QM production.
But I get your point. So, what can we say about A Man Called Sloane? I think it was very ambitious. Yes, James Bond movies were very popular in 1979, throughout the 70s, 80s, all the way to nowadays. They put out a Bond movie every 2-3 years, and he's still as popular as ever. Yes, they tried spy shows in the past, maybe like the I Spy type of show we talked about, maybe not like a James Bond type of spy. Definitely without the sex that you saw in these episodes. I mean, even if you just look at the open, there is a lot of sexuality coming into play in terms of the silhouette of a woman who I'm guessing just came out of pool, like flipping her hair back. So you could tell they're sort of playing this kind of as a TV version of James Bond. Unfortunately, just like everything else NBC had in 1979, it just petered out very quickly. And for those reasons, A Man Called Sloane was just a thing on TV. You can find us at our website, itwasathingontv.com, on Facebook at It Was a Thing on TV Podcast, and elsewhere at It Was a Thing on TV. You can find us on any podcast player, and we're also on YouTube, where you can subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with our releases, including what's coming up next time. We're going to stay in the sort of crime drama realm, not really in the spy genre. We're going to go back about 9 years, 10 years, and we're going to talk about another show that was
A Quinn Martin production.
And really, the lead of this show, he would be maybe the biggest box office draw of the entire 70s by the end of that decade. But this is sort of where he cut his teeth. I think you know who we're talking about. I think you know what show we're talking about. But be here on Thursday to confirm what we're talking about. Right here, it is a thing on TV. Please, if you hear this on Monday or Tuesday, vote. Get the word out. This is maybe the most important election of our lives. Regardless of how you vote, just do it. But please also stay safe. And we will catch you on Thursday with that next installment.
Wow!
Saturday on Chips, Conch and John are hot on the dangerous trail of a gang of gas bandits. Next,
Something's wrong. I can feel it.
can BJ help Snow White and the Seven Lady Truckers deliver a fortune in used currency? Then, on A Man Called Sloane, a mad general with a diabolical weapon plots to capture an atom bomb. An explosive evening of danger, Saturday. Next Sunday on Disney's Wonderful World, don't miss the hilarious conclusion of $1 Million Duck starring Dean Jones and Sandy Duncan.
There's no way you can call this a regular battery. This is the ever-ready alkaline power cell. This is no regular battery.
For the typical cassette recorder, you can't buy a longer-lasting, all-purpose power cell than C-size Ever-Ready Alkaline.
So when you want long-lasting energy for these recorders, think ever-ready alkaline.
I dare you to call it regular. I dare you.